And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel. Thanks so much for joining. I am overjoyed to have Tad Williams here on the channel, who is the author of all kinds of series, including one of my all-time favorites, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Just recently finished up Last King of Austin Art with The Navigator's Children, which is also excellent. Everything else from Shadow March to Otherland to Tailchaser's Song, which is back on the other side here too. But all kinds of stuff. Just a giant of fantasy. So great to have you here, Tad.
Oh, thank you, Nico. It's nice to be here.
But
it's nice to be anywhere.
I mean, hey, that's true. That's true.
No, it's always true. It's like my family and my wife in particular were always going, "Oh my God, life is exhausting," and then we go, "Yeah, but think about the alternative." Right? Yeah, absolutely.
That is true. I know you had a comment one time, which just reminded me of I was going to mention later, but that you need your readers to breathe, because if they don't breathe, they're dead readers, and you don't want that. So,
yeah, exactly. No,
being alive is
yeah, it's bad for repeat sales.
It's true. It's very true. And we have Andrew here, who is a longtime fan, and Derek as well here too. Welcome, everybody. It looks like everybody's starting to file in. I'm seeing the numbers go up, but yeah, I appreciate you being here too. It's we were talking before. It sounds like you were having issues with power, so thankfully that's back on and allowing us to be here. But I was going to say it's probably nicer there than here, because I'm in Iowa in the Midwest, where we are really hitting winter a little early right now. So probably just a bit nicer over in California.
Generally, because we're not far from the ocean, yeah, we have fairly moderate. We did have a gigantic one of those bucketing down rainstorms last night, but we don't have too many of those. And no, it's very nice here. Where in Iowa are you?
I'm in Des Moines. I used to be in northern Iowa, where it would be even colder, but now I'm right smack dab in the middle.
Yeah, I like Iowa. I've been there several times, but I've just always really liked it, and had one of my very fond experience going through Iowa City once, and just how much it was like. It was like driving through a Ray Bradbury story. At that time, there was like. No, I mean, it was lovely. It was lovely. It was like but Bradbury wrote a lot of stories based on his childhood in Illinois. And I remember driving through Iowa City, and this one particular place, there was like still a traffic light on a cord or whatever it is, a cable over the road, which I hadn't seen even back then. And that was a long time ago, which I hadn't seen for years, and old fashioned gas pumps and everything. I was like, did somebody run along ahead of me and like set this up? Is this like, what is it? Welcome to Willoughby or one of those Twilight Zone things? It was so lovely and looked like a little time capsule, but it was also just really pretty,
You still get in some of the smaller towns, you do feel like you're kind of going into the past when you show up there, because you still get some of that. But yeah, reading Bradbury, I don't know that there's any other author that's mentioned Iowa more times than Bradbury has. So it was so fun reading through, and I'm like, oh hey, somebody's actually mentioning real places in Iowa, and you don't get that a lot.
Shout out.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Fun, but I actually I was born in the San Diego area and grew up there for the first part of my life, and then moved here. So I've kind of had both. And so it's like, Iowa's nice for, it's quiet, it's cheap, but it's definitely it doesn't really have like any of the kind of nicer, bigger populated type of things, but it's still a nice place to live overall.
Absolutely. I mean, we're in the general San Francisco Bay Area, but we have kind of moved farther and farther into the hills over the years, just because Deborah and I, my wife Deborah, we both work at home, and we're pretty much here all the time. So, first of all, the quiet is important, and second of all, just being surrounded by something you like looking at all day, which in our case is trees. So, yeah, no, I mean, I actually contemplated moving to Iowa a couple of times when we were trying to figure out what we were doing next. And it was just that kind of quiet, slow pace I was looking for. It was not a reaction to anything in California. It was just like, if I'm going to leave California for some reason, where would be a nice, calm, peaceful place to set up. So yeah, no, I have fond feelings.
I was gonna say I could see that. Yeah, if you're kind of just looking for that the quiet, there's a lot of options in Iowa and areas for that. So Yeah, I can definitely see that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I popped up, as you mentioned, Deborah, who's here as well. And then we have Shad, who, yeah, I was just talking to him about Navigator's Children. He was one of the first people I was able to talk spoilers with, which was really nice too. So I know he had a really great time with it.
Yeah.
And then we've
So
got
glad to hear it.
Shadia and Water here.
I know
And Andrew, we'll get there.
there are really, really, the interesting thing about Navigator's Children is there are, and the spoiler effect is that there are literally spoilers for things that were back in Dragonbone Chair and Stone of Farewell, in the sense that some of these things that were floating around back then are, some of them are being explained or whatever, revealed as it were, in Navigator's Children. So yeah, it's not just your normal, oh, spoilers for the previous 3 books. It's like, yeah, and spoilers for Dragonbone Chair series and other stuff as well. So I can understand why it's fun to have it. I'm waiting for, for it to hit enough people to have read it that there can be discussions in public without me feeling like we're ruining anything for anyone else. So, because yeah, it's a big project. I mean, I'm thrilled to be done with it, but I loved it while I was doing it.
And we'll, since we're there, because obviously something I was going to talk about, I have a lot of different things, but
that's fine.
No, I mean, it's a great segue to talk, because with Navigator's Children, I mean, it is more than just the last book in a new series. It's a series, that follow up after 30 years. And it's so I feel like that's definitely got to hit a little bit different, kind of closing out that second one. And I know with I've seen some stuff you've said about the approach where, you're really just trying to look at the characters and go. But yeah, how different is that approaching a follow-up series, trying to recapture the feel of the original and the characters, but with that change, obviously, after how long they've aged as well?
Right. Well, that is the $64,000 question, as the old saying goes. It definitely was one of the things that I was most concerned about. I've told this story a couple times, but it was only long after I had announced that I was going to be doing this series of returning, not just to Ostenard, but returning to those particular characters, at least some of them, that I got this wave of lovely, kind, oh, so excited, that Dragonbone Chair series was which is what everybody calls it, except for the people who are sticklers, who do call it Sorrow and Thorn. But a lot of people just go, oh, the Dragonbone Chair books. But anyway, I got this really wonderful outpouring of kindness and excitement and all that. And I suddenly had this heart-stopping realization that if I screwed the pooch on this one, not only would I be messing up the first book of a new series, this is when I was doing the Witchwood Crown, not only would I be messing up the first book of a long, project, but that I would be interfering with a lot of people's fondness for the earlier books as well. So there was this double weight of like, oh my God, don't mess up. But the thing that kind of guided me through was that the characters came back very strongly. As I've also said a few times, I had to have help from various friends. I have a kind of a core group who I refer to as the cannoneers, of like 4 people who know the work, or at that point knew the work better than I do, because they had been rereading the original books over the years. And I, of course, had not. I'd been writing other books, and you just put stuff in the rear view mirror. But anyway, so I had this sudden like, oh my God, but I had all this help from these folks to deal with the small matters, the punctilia, the trivia, and I don't mean small in the sense of not important, but I mean the things that I didn't remember. I could say, can you guys tell me when this was established, or did we do this, or whatever? But for me, the characters still felt very real. And as soon as I said, okay, just older and what's happened to them since then, they clicked into place very carefully. I never felt like, oh, I can't get a grasp on who Miriam L is or who Simon is now. They just felt like, like old friends. When you see them again, it may have been a long time, but after a sentence or two, it reassures you, no, they're still the same person. We still have that connection. And oddly, fictional characters, maybe even frighteningly from a diagnostic point of view, they felt like real people to me. And I was able to kind of very quickly reconnect with them. So that was the first thing. That was the approach I took into the story to begin with. Was I know the main characters. And so now that we start to think about what's happened to them and how that's going to affect what's going on now, and all the kind of story building stuff that you do in the initial stages, I can trust that I will get their reactions right. And that will steer a lot of the story. Because for me, listening to characters is as important as trying to apply the heavy hand of the authorial mandate, and say, this has to happen because I planned it, and it's this wonderful little bit, and I, damn it, do what I want. And sometimes the characters don't want to cooperate, and I have learned to listen to that inner voice, which I don't actually believe is the characters or is an ancient Greek muse. I think it's part of the apparatus that we all have as creative thinking people.
Trying real hard to convince us that you're not crazy, Tad.
Yeah, well, no,
maybe a little too hard, but
I would never try to do that. But it was very much a thing of once I had that trust, I could go forward. And then once I was kind of trusting the story, I was back in the same mode that I was in with any other long thing I've written, except that I did have, an earlier record that I had to pay attention to and respect. But that actually was fine because it gave me a lot more angles to go off on, because so many of these things had already been at least basically established, what the various cultures were like, and what the general flow of history was and stuff like that. So it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. But the most heartening thing was that I very quickly found myself just as involved, which surprised me. I will admit it. It surprised me. I very quickly found myself just as involved in that story and those characters as I ever had been when I was doing them for the first time as a much younger writer with much less experience. But thank God there seems to be a thing where if you embark on something the right way, and you trust the process and all that, where, the story will manifest. And then as the writer, I will love what I'm doing and will be able to throw myself into it, which I think is the only way to write something this big. You've got to just kind of like dive off the deep end and say, this process is going to be going on for a long time. I must trust it. I must believe that if I have a character who's really getting at me and going like, why am I not in the story yet? That there's a reason that some part of my brain knows something that the conscious part of my brain doesn't know. So anyway, long, windy answer, but it was a bit daunting at times until I decided, no, but I'm okay with this. It feels good. It feels organic. I'm not doing fan service, I've got nothing against fan service, but it can corrupt the process.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know, we've all seen that happen in things that a lot of people are invested in, and at a certain point they start to sway it. And thank goodness my readers have never been like that. They just want to hear what's going to happen. They don't want to force it into being. So yeah, it became a very enjoyable process. I mean, 10 years. I mean, that's the only problem with writing long books is you're going to come a chunk of your finite lifetime to doing it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I will say for me, you really nailed it, because that was one of the first things I even said when I read The Witch with Crown and I was getting my review ready for it, is that it really did feel natural. It felt like these are these exact characters. It's just time has passed. Simon, you still kind of want to smack him upside the head sometimes because he's being, a mooncalf, but he's like, he's older, he has matured, but he still has that part of him. And so many of the characters too, I felt like I was back in Austin Art. I felt like these are the characters that I know. And the comment about them, they're obviously not actually real people, but
right.
You spend thousands of pages with these characters and they do feel real. And so yeah, for me it worked so well. And it's just hearing you talk about your process too. And I saw a quote from you where you just commented that you found you have to write for you and you have to do the things that you want as a reader to get it. And it, thankfully for me, the things that you as a reader apparently want are the exact things that I as a reader want, because so much about the way you write just is so perfect for me and what I want to read as well. So it's worked out really well for me.
Thank you, Nico. I mean, for those who haven't heard that original comment, and not that you misrepresented it in any way, because you didn't, but just because it is kind of like a big part of my philosophy, that the whole idea is that a lot of times, especially young writers, or people who are just kind of early on in their career for whatever reason, are encouraged to sometimes, or feel that they should think about the market. And I'm always saying, the market, first of all, you don't know the market. The publishing industry barely knows the market, and they're 2 years ahead of you. That's what it's their job to do, and they don't always guess right. So how are you, as somebody sitting at home reading books, going to guess what the market's going to be? Not likely. Possible, but not likely. But the main thing about it, though, is that it also gets in the way of using your best audience. And any writer's best audience is him or herself, or themself. Because you can't judge, really, except in an abstract way, in a sort of a political, polling kind of way, what readers want, and what is a reader anyway? I mean, that's the same question. It's like asking, what is a voter? Any individual, there are huge differences. So what you can do, however, and this is why I think this is important, what you can do, and sorry for saying this all again, because I know you already know it, but what you can
Totally okay.
Yeah, what you can do is you can focus on a reader that you truly understand and can even interrogate, which is yourself. And therefore, you are writing for at least one real person that you know how they feel and what they want. And that's better than writing for 100 imaginary people where you're just guessing, or worse, writing for an imaginary market that you have no idea if it will ever be there or not. And then again, to recapitulate what you already said, when you round around at the end, you will hope that there are people like you who like the same things you do, but at least you know that if those people exist, you have tailored your work to an actual kind of human being, albeit yourself in this case, but you have found an actual human being and written to that taste. And then you hope that there are enough people out there who like the same kinds of general things, same kinds of writing, same kinds of ideas. So anyway, sorry, but that is something that I do believe very strongly. And that's why I went back through it all again, probably to the irritation of you and many, many listeners.
Oh no, I mean it's super insightful to think about too. And I feel like when somebody's chasing the market, I feel like you can always tell, or at least as a avid fantasy readers, but I can usually tell where I'm like, oh, you threw this in because this is popular right now. You did, so I feel like you can tell, and it's just you're going to get a truer story. And I've read some other authors too who they're writing something that's very specific, and there may or may not be a market for it, but it works for them. And it just, as I feel like a writer and a reader, I can only speak for the reader side, but I feel like it makes it more special finding your audience when they do really connect with that thing that's really something special to you and what you wanted. And so that's where it's finding a book that just fits my taste so well. It's just always such an exciting thing and experience there. And so
and this is by no means a denigration or criticism of niche writing. People who say, oh, I really want to write this kind of book for a special fraction of the audience, because again, it's not a question of where you're aiming, it's a question of, are you writing as sincerely as you can? So if all you're interested in, say for instance, is writing gay 16th century vampire fiction, right? That no problem. Excellent. Just make sure that it's the book you want to read. And then you will find an audience if there are enough people who like what you like. It has nothing to do with trying to, go mainstream. It has something to do with going to the smallest possible audience you can access, which is, yourself.
For sure. I feel like I should catch up on the chat here. So we have Heidi, very excited to start Last King of Bostonard. She's heard me raving about it a lot lately too. So I was excited. We have Fart Vader, excited to be here as well.
Excited to be allowed out of the house, I'm sure.
And Shad, who was hoping for bigger than Green Angel. Well, technically, because it was split. So
exactly. Yeah. Shad, I think you're actually had your wish. It's just that I realized ahead of time this time that it would not be publishable as one single volume. I'm slowly learning. Yeah, because Into the Narrow Dark was originally the first half of The Navigator's Children. And then, and this is what always happens, by the way, with these. This is why I consistently overrun my remit, as it were, for what everybody, or what I think I'm going to be writing, is the stories themselves. First of all, they have to have the time that they need. And if you force it one way or the other, and that's make it longer or make it shorter to try and fit into something, it's going to show up. But more importantly, I think for me personally, is that I also have my method, especially for these big books, and I'm sure you know this very well, is I like to have lots of characters to describe things and to interpolate things through their own thoughts and reactions, so that the reader gets lots of viewpoints instead of an overarching narrative voice that essentially tells you this is what's real, this is how it all happens. And because that feels more like the world I grew up in and that I live in now, where it's a matter of how consensus develops as to what reality is, But because of that, and this is why these things get so long, I also am a firm believer that you cannot give an audience a consistent insight into a character, even a small character, without giving them an arc of their own, that you don't just drop them 2/3 of the way through the story and never go back to them, or give them a hasty, clumsy wrap up, to just end that plot line at the end of the story. No, if you're going to have the reader living with that character and in that character's thoughts, I believe that the reader will also want to see that character's arc, because it's part of my kind of, for lack of a better term, my democratic message, which is that everybody matters. Nobody, and if you start using characters to follow the plot and then you toss them out at the ending because you don't think they're relevant, then that is the message you're sending, is no, not everybody is important. And I don't agree with that, both philosophically and as a writer.
Yeah, I read a little bit about that too with the characters, and because you had some comments too, and feel free to elaborate for the record as well, because it's all really insightful. But about specifically with like world building and establishing bits of that, where you do it between the interactions of the characters, which can also make things run longer. And that's another thing where I'm reading you talk about how you write, and I'm like, oh, he's just describing what I like in books, because it's one of those things. That's always something that gets really high praise for me if an author does a good job with that, where they're building out the world and the lore through these character interactions. We're not just stopping to explain all of these things. We're doing it through all of that, and that can make it go longer, but it's something that really, really just works well for me, and I love the way when it's kind of built in like that, for sure.
Well, thank you. It to me, it really is, I mean, we're always in our business. And by that, I mean the fantasy, science fiction, horror, whatever you want to call it, the spec fic business. That's, somebody tried to coin the term speculative fiction. We're always in the spec fic business. We're trying to connect with readers in a way that not all kinds of fiction need to, because most kinds of fiction, even if they're set in the past or something like that, they tend to basically be about people who are inarguably people. They are, they are human beings. Whereas the fact of humanity and the existence of unfamiliar physics or powers or whatever, all this is part of science fiction and fantasy. So we're already working with a bit of a deficit in terms of the suspension of disbelief, compared to, say, somebody who's writing a modern novel, about disaffected couples in Connecticut or something like that in the 1990s or whatever. Most people will feel like, okay, that's real, I'll just go with it. We have to get people to suspend their disbelief. And one of the ways you do that is by characters doing things that feel appropriate to the reader. You know, I mean, the obvious extreme opposite end of that is, you know, the old horror movie tropes of like, oh, I hear a noise upstairs. Let's get the candelabra and go up and see what's dragging, you know, big heavy chains around up, you know, or whatever it might be. And everybody in the audience is going, no, come on, don't go up there. Jesus, are you stupid? Have you never seen a horror movie? And the fact is that we live in an age where the tropes of adventure and danger and all these kinds of things are all around us, and we are very postmodern. We are very aware of them, even, you know, all except the youngest and most beginning readers who are not my readers for these books. So you're dealing with a number of things that are unusual when you're in fantasy and science fiction. And one of them is that you have readers who've usually read a great deal of this kind of material. So therefore they are, for lack of a better term, they are trope sensitive. You know, they've got the antenna going and they're going like, oh, I know what they're going to do here. You know, I see this one coming. It's the famous, you know, princess in disguise thing or something like that, you know, and they're right on one level in the sense that these are old tropes. So it is endemic. No, but anyway, it is on the author to understand that this is not your grandfather's audience. This is a postmodern, post-Tolkien, post-everything, you know, post-Game of Thrones now audience that is looking for all of these things and is pretty savvy. And as a result, you have to then make that part of your writing process, the awareness of what the reader is going to be thinking. So it's actually, I can only speak for myself, but it's one of the fun things for me is thinking, okay, how can I lead the readers astray in a fair way? And because I know they're going to be guessing, and I know that they're going to, you know, have moments of aha, I see what he's going to do here. And how can I rip that carpet out from under them enough times that they will sort of sit back, I hope, sit back and go, oh my God, I have no idea what he's going to do or what any author is going to do. And so that becomes also then a kind of cat and mouse game between, in my case, me, the writer, and a bunch of really sharp readers who have read a lot of this kind of stuff. And with the age of greater pipelining of types of fiction, you know, not only have they read a lot of speculative fiction in general, but most of them have read a lot of fantasy, epic fantasy. You know, and they've usually, if they haven't read Tolkien, they know all about Tolkien, or they've seen the movies, they've read Game of Thrones, they've read The Wheel of Time. You know, I hope they've read some others too, like Guy Kay and people like that. But they are aware and they are working not just with you, but also against you, in the sense that if they start to find things too simple or that they are right too often, you lose that edge as the writer. You know, of being the magician on stage with the black cloak and the hat and all this stuff, and nobody knows what's going to come out of them. So that's another part of the process too. We're dealing with a much more sophisticated genre audience than would have been true 50, 60 years ago. Certainly when I was a little kid and a teenager growing up. So that's one of the things that drove me into the field in the first place, is that I kind of saw that and saw that a lot of writers of the 70s in particular and early 80s seemed to be more interested in recapitulating, say, like Tolkien, than in being aware of the fact that this was now a post-Tolkienian audience. I mean, I wasn't thinking about it in those specific terms, but I saw that. And that's one of the things that made me want to get into this field, you know, much to my later worry of like, oh my God, did I get into a dying industry? You know, is meaning books.
Well,
because we all worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I mean, it's so many of my favorites were published around the 90s, very much including yours. But well, and it's interesting thinking about that too, with kind of how much you can take inspiration or how much you can do the tropes, making sure that you subvert, and you know, seeing when it's time to change as well. And like I know I've seen there's a quote from George R.R. Martin about you saying that, you know, when he read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, he realized that, oh my gosh, you can actually like do original interesting things with some of these tropes, and it's not just the formulaic kind of stuff too. And which kind of leads me into with, you know, and I know I've seen you talk about some of your big inspirations, you know, Tolkien of course being one, and Bradbury, and many others. But what's it like having like all of these people that you hold up as like your big, you know, legends, your inspirations, and then being that person for so many other authors that came after you, like, you know, like Martin, you know, even Jordan and Paulini and so many other authors that took a lot of inspiration from your stuff? What's it like balancing between the two?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that, because my first thought as you began the question was, yeah, how do I feel about it? And the thing is, in real life, it doesn't impact at all, in the sense that and so obviously there's a part of me that goes, oh, how lovely, you know, what a nice thing to hear. But as I tried to point out to my wife the other day when we were talking about something, this was a while back, I said, you know, I don't actually need to keep up with what's going on in the field, because everything that makes me write the way that I write is stuff that I absorbed between the ages of 0 and like 18. And that kind of created my creative impulse in the writing realm of things. And in the same sense, all I can do, it feels like all I can do is just do what I do best. And because I learned really early on, curiously, for somebody who gets as many kind comments like that about being, you know, an important figure, eminence grise, you know, all that kind of stuff in the field. You know, I have never been particularly mainstream. I mean, I sell books, but I don't get nominated for awards or anything like that. And this is not a complaint. It probably has a lot to do with a number of factors, including that Deb and I kind of absented ourselves from the conversations when we started to have kids, which was back in the 90s. But it's also one of those things where, as the time goes on, I realize, you know, I have no control over anything except what is immediately around me. So if people feel like I had an important effect on our subgenre in some way, then that's lovely and wonderful, and I love it. But beyond that, I could not do differently than I'm doing, even if everybody was saying, "Oh my God, get out of the business. You're just horrible." You know, I would be like, "Well, what? But I can't do anything else." You know, I've specialized now. You know, maybe if you'd got me 30 years ago when I was doing drama and radio and all this other stuff, but it's too late now. I'm specialized. I am, you know, like Charlie Bucket's father in the chocolate factory. I'm the guy who screws the cap on toothpaste tubes at the factory, and that's all I know how to do. So I'm pleased and thrilled whenever people tell me that I've been important to the field in some way, but I'm also very conscious of the fact that I was just trying to take the best path forward for me. And we keep, it's funny how circular this stuff is, but I guess it shows how limited my imagination is. We keep coming back to the same thing. Then the thing here is I can only write the book that I want to read. I couldn't change that if I tried, because it wouldn't be good. I wouldn't be engaged. And because of that, I can't really think of another way to be. So I couldn't have set out to be influential. Not that I ever considered it, but I couldn't have set out to do that, because there's really only one way I know how to do this. And the fact that in some circles I'm considered to be that is lovely, but it hasn't changed any of my writing. And I came to terms with the fact that for some reason I'm not award bait, and maybe because my books are so damn
long. You
long.
Should be.
Well, thank you. But I think part of it's just my books are so long. It's hard to judge any single volume as a whole. And that's kind of how the award systems work. But, beyond it's, I don't want it to sound like I'm upset about that, because it's one of those things that I got used to a while ago and went, okay, well, I just have a different course. But of course I'm pleased. Of course, the idea that a writer as good as George, and I admired George's writing long before we were ever on the same turf. And in fact, I told him that the first time I met him when he scared me. But it's a story I've told several times. It's basically he was being funny. And I didn't realize that because he's big and gruff and bearded and, you know, and I kept trying to introduce myself to him at a con and he kept telling me to get the hell out of here. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? And anyway, when it turned out he was playing with me. And what he said was, get the hell out of here, go home and finish that volume, right? I'm waiting for it. And I had no idea that he had ever read anything of mine at that point, but I knew him from a lot of his early stories and things like that, and always admired his writing. But anyway, so yeah, that's a huge thrill to know that people found some value in what I was doing. But honestly, in my writing life, yeah, it's like I'm a microscopist. You know, I'm somebody who looks through a microscope for a living. So people might be standing around me going, he's a damn good microscopist, you know. But meanwhile, I'm just trying to focus on this tiny little thing in front of me, which is whatever I'm working on at the moment. I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know if any of that made any sense, but it's
absolutely
okay. But I mean, needless to say, I don't ever want to say that I'm upset by somebody saying kind things about the effect of my work. It's just that there's no point in getting too worked up about it. You know, it's not going to change anything for me. You know, the proof in the pudding is going to be, I guess, if people still read my books after I'm dead and not around to to do interviews. But whatever the case is, I just want to be able to say I gave it my best shot. You know, I didn't stint. You know, I never took my readers for granted because I assume that they're as smart as I am. So, you know.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Very much so. And something you said in there too about kind of specializing, because you've done almost everything. It feels like from like looking in, you know, you the books, obviously you've done sci-fi, fantasy, different things. You know, you've written. I saw you wrote a TV pilot and filmed it with Greg Proops, which was really cool. You've done improv, theater, TV, like so many different things. So, like, are there any things that like stand out remembering, or is there anything that you always wanted to do but never did?
Well, I'm enough of a control freak that I think I would have been interested in directing, either film or television. I enjoy, and that's one of the reasons being a novelist, and especially a world building novelist, was such a natural fit for me, because I love thinking about as many aspects of a problem or a situation as I can manage to invent or to think of. So there is that kind of thing. But what I realized early on is that basically I'm a storyteller, and that was true whether I was in theater or whether I was writing songs or whatever the case might be. I also realized that I like having an audience, which doesn't have to be a live audience right in front of me, although I love that. I love going out on, you know, book tours and stuff and having a room full of people who've actually come to listen to me blather at them. So, you know, I'm very much enjoying all of those aspects of it. I've lost my thread here as to what we were talking about. Just now kicking
different. No worries. Just like all the different things you've done, and if there's anything.
Oh, right.
Like,
yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That you'd want to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Exactly. So one of the things that I realized early on is that I do like doing something where the things that I'm making are actually going to go to an audience, to readers, to whatever the case may be. So, because there are some kinds of artists who are sort of pure artists who have things inside them they are so desperate to process or to get out of their psyche or whatever, that they will happily, you know, just do the art, and that's enough, right? And there's a lot of sort of you know, outsider genius types who are like that. And I'm very fond of many of them, whether in the arts or music or in literature or whatever. But that's not me. What I like is I like to make things for people and hand them over and go, here, I hope you like this. And then, you know, hope that they like, you know, hope you hear back, oh yeah, I really did enjoy that. So I'm not somebody who wants to be isolated from response. And all of that said, that's really all it's about for me. I wanted, in this case, to tell stories more directly than you do when you're acting someone else's story, or you're writing a song where you're also trying to incorporate nonverbal aspects and stuff like that. And you know, it's easier in books because you're literally just saying, here is the story. But that's you know, like I've said in the past, I could have gone any number of ways. I was not fated to be a writer, although in retrospect, I did grow up in a very bookish environment. And most of my most profound experiences when I was young were books, or in books, or at least a lot of them. So it was kind of there, and I didn't even realize it. I was more caught up in, oh, you know, I'm going to become an artist. I'm, you know, going to go into cartooning or illustration, or, you know, whatever was going on for me at the time, because I did have other interests. But ultimately, it just came down to, oh, look, writing. I can do that in my spare time. I don't have to worry that the drummer broke up with his girlfriend and he's too depressed to show up for practice, or, you know, whatever the case may be, or our little local theater just suddenly lost its technical director and we're messed up and we can't put on the show. Or so, you know, and all back in those days, you know, you didn't even need a computer. You just needed a typewriter when I started out. And, you know, you typewriter and a ream of paper, and you could do anything and then send it off and hope somebody cared about it. So that was the way I went.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that resonates, you know, in a little bit of a different way. But I mean, like, as somebody who talks about books on the internet, and all of that kind of stuff with it, I did legitimately. I was putting out book reviews for about 6 months before anybody really watched them,
Yeah.
like regularly too. And then I realized that, like, you know, for me, just being able to, you know, talk about books, get it out there, because I don't really have a lot of people in my like real life that are big readers. That was great. Then yeah, having people actually respond and be like, hey, I like the content you're putting out and enjoy it. It's really nice. It is nice, you know, getting that kind of response too. And you know, it's a big reason of why I've continued doing it, and you know, that sort of thing. And then as somebody who was in a band once upon a time too, that resonates as well with of what's going to happen with that, what's going to be going on there for sure as well. So
absolutely. Well, and that's the thing, like what you were just saying about your reviews and developing an audience and all that is, you know, we are human, and therefore, first of all, we are social animals. You know, we have a capacity and in fact a need to plug in to other humans. That's kind of how we are created. Most of what humanity has done as a species in terms of spreading out across the globe is based on the fact that we cooperate, that we specialize, you know, that we have developed tools, literally tools in our lives that allow us to specialize, like agriculture and stuff. So some people can do that and some people can do other things. All of these things are crucial. So there's a basic level of human connection that we all have, unless you're extremely mentally ill, where, you know, we recognize other human beings as being, you know, our comrades, our fellows. But then there are in decreasing smaller and smaller levels of connection, which at the same time go up in intensity. So as they get smaller. So you find all the people who like to read, and that's a big connection between people, but it's also a very common connection. And so then you shrink it down even smaller. You go, people who like to read certain kinds of things, or people who have a certain kind of attitude towards the things they read, or people who like to talk about the things they've read and share them with others. So, you know, and when you get to the final thing, which is that I love this, and you meet other people who say, I love it too, that is one of the most satisfying forms of human social connection, to realize I am not alone in the universe. There are people who get the same things that I get and love them for the same reasons. And so I think all of life is a journey in part. I mean, this is obviously a huge reductionist, you know, thing to say, but I think all of life in part is a journey where we're kind of sending out these broad social vibes. And then as we meet people, we gradually shrink down the wavelength until we find where our exact connection with those people are. And sometimes it's just vague, but other people, it's like, this is my soulmate, or this is the person who totally will always, you know, I'll listen to what they have to say about anything in the arts or whatever, because I really grasp what they grasp, and vice versa. So yeah, no, I mean, it's a huge connection. with the world. And I'm sure it was really, really exciting for you when you first began to realize, oh my God, people are listening, and there are people out there who feel the same way that I do. Yeah, it's important, is what it is.
Oh, for sure. And it's yeah, the biggest compliment I ever get as a book reviewer is when somebody picks up a series that I love because I've sold them on it, and then they tell me how much they loved it as well. It's just it's pretty fantastic to have.
Absolutely. For sure. And just a brief comment here, and genuinely brief, we, the writers, the creators, we rely on that, because word of mouth is so much more valuable than anything else. And yes, I mean, you need the other stuff. You need simply to make people aware that things are out there. But it's the word of mouth. It's people who you can tell like the same kinds of things that you like and say, oh, you got to read this. This is great.
Yeah.
You know, that's huge. And it's certainly how I have always picked up the things that I like, you know, from when I was a kid and could only shop in the used paperback section. But it's always been based on someone else told me, or, you know, if it's a new writer, say, for instance, someone else told me, oh, you should check out this guy. You know, I mean, when I could give examples, but I won't. But, you know, that is the most powerful thing, when somebody that you already feel comfortable with and agree with on a lot of creative things tells you you'll love this. There's nothing better in terms of saying, you know, of feeling confident that it's at least worth a try. So yeah, no, we thrive on good word of mouth more so than any other form of advertisement.
Absolutely. All right, I should check the chat since I've been neglecting it for like a half hour because I've been too wrapped up in our conversation.
I've been blathering. That's what I do.
Well, I mean, it's a good problem to have for sure. If I was constantly checking the chat, that'd probably be a bad sign. But we have Paramita, who says, Memory of Stormthorn, Shadow March, Last King of Asgard, all beautiful series. Congratulations on Navigator's Children. And I told myself I was going to read Shadow March before I read Last King, and I still haven't, but it is so high on my list, along with anything else from yours that I haven't yet read.
There is no judgment here, Nico. No judgment. I don't think anybody who likes my other fantasy will have any issues with it in terms of feeling comfortable. It's a different world. It's a different, some things are set up different. But I don't think, I went back. I had to read part of it for an obscure reason. And I went, I mean, why don't we talk about these books more? I mean, you know, it's like, I know it's not as well known as the series, but I'm really proud of these. So yeah, I think you'll enjoy them when you read them.
I am very excited for sure with those. And then we have Andrew asking if Otherland was supposed to be a trilogy too.
Yes, it was. It really was. But the thing was, I thought, I'll be all smart and I'll recognize that I totally failed on the trilogy front with Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. So once I started outlining it, and I went, oh my God, this is huge. I said, you know, okay, I'll learn my lesson and I'll make it 4 books to begin with. So yeah, no, it was initially conceived of as a trilogy. I don't know where, I mean, I got so hung up on this whole idea of multiple volume stories. I mean, I guess I'm better at telling long stories than I am at curtailing long stories. So yeah.
I mean, I love the long ones, but
there's stuff there's good stuff. It's worth talking about at some point. The difference between writing really long stories and writing normal length stories is worth talking about, but
for sure.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. And in many ways, actually, since Andrew mentioned Otherland, one of the things that people often ask me, you know, which of your books are you most proud? And I don't think I'm most proud of any of them, but I do feel like the Otherland books are kind of the best display of, you know, all the different things that I like to do and that I'm interested in doing in a fiction form. So sometimes I will offer Otherland up as an example of something I'm most proud of, which is a bit of a misnomer. It's not pride per se, but it is like okay, you get to see some humor and you get to see some of the stranger ideas and you get to see some parody and you get to see this and that. And plus I've disgorged a huge amount of things I'm interested in, like endless houses and Egyptian mythology and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that's, I think is also one reason I'm very fond of the Otherland books as well, is because I don't think anything I've written covers quite as much terrain as those books.
Those are definitely, Andrew has been telling me about it for years and that I should read it. And I absolutely will too. I'm just like, I want to read the fantasy stuff first. It's kind of more in my wheelhouse.
This is not being aimed at you,
things.
and I'm not trying to coerce you into reading anything. I'm just saying that question often comes up. What are you most proud of? And again, it's an old cliche, but your books are like your children. It's almost impossible to say which one you love the most. But if somebody wanted to say, you know, what do you do as a writer that is particularly unique to you? I would probably give them the Otherland books, because I think they have all the stuff that's good about the epic fantasies, but they're wild. You know, they're wild. There is no barrier, boundaries around what I can do in those, what I could do in those books. So anyway, enough. I'm not trying to shame you.
No,
but
it's okay.
Don't worry about it. But it basically, it's an epic fantasy. I mean, that's the thing to understand about Otherland. It may be set in the near future, but most of it takes place in virtual reality. And these are virtual reality environments that can be literary or historical or just invented, like the cartoon universe of the Night Kitchen or whatever. So really, most of it runs like epic fantasy. You know, it's a bunch of people come together to find out why something has gone wrong and are drawn deeper and deeper into it. So it's not as science fiction-y as some people think.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know for sure. And then we have Sandra saying, best way to spend an evening.
Hello, Sandra.
And then we have Heidi saying, never felt fatigue with Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, which I have to say, neither did I. Even to Green Angel Tower, I did take a break between the two parts because I thought I would, but I got too excited to get to the second half, and I ended up not taking my break because I'm like, no, I'm just gonna finish it now.
Plunge ahead.
Yeah.
Part of that, and I always refer to this as my falling downstairs technique. I like to, because I've got so many plot lines, I will oftentimes end a plot line chapter on a sort of cliffhanger. And I know that irritates the audience, but that's okay with me, because then usually in the next chapter, I'm going to give them something they were irritated that they didn't find out earlier. You know, in other words, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. Okay, now I've got you leaning forward. I'm going to pull that away from you, and I'm going to say, remember this one you were leaning forward on? Now we're going to go back to it. And hopefully that way you continue tumbling the reader downstairs one floor, one landing at a time, until eventually they find themselves at the end of the book and go, oh my God, how did I read all of that? Anyway, that's my theory. That's my hope.
I can, for me, it was very much that way for sure. And then we have Shad excited for Shadow March and War of the Flowers. I also still need to read that one too. I've collected most of your hardcovers, even though I haven't gotten to them yet.
Hey, first of all, Nico, here's important to realize. I am very happy for people to buy some of my books to help me support my family, even if they're not going to read them immediately. Once you bought the book, you're off the hook, so to speak. There's like, you have done me a kindness, and I am not going to sit there and go, now, have you read it yet? If I'm doing my job, you will read it because you'll want to. But, beyond that point, never apologize. If you bought books of mine, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. My wife thanks you. My kids thank you. My dogs and cats thank you. Our local domestic banana slugs, thank you, because we live in banana slug country. All of the above. So yeah, never apologize for having bought books that you haven't read yet, because it keeps us alive. Absolutely.
Yeah, I did buy the whole Last King series at release, even though I only got to them in the last couple of months. I binged
you're my
the whole
hero.
thing.
You're my hero.
Yeah. And then Heidi asks if you have a new favorite author that we should read, which I was going to ask in general, if you have like an author that isn't talked about enough that you would definitely recommend as well. We can wrap in.
Sadly, and you may have glimpsed a little of this coming from some of my earlier statements, I do not have as much time now to read new writers. And to be honest, it's the same way. And this is a curious thing. I'm sure it's not just me. I'm sure it's partially the process of becoming an older person. I do not go out looking for new things as often as I used to. And the difference between me and a lot of other people in the same situation is I would never make the mistake of going, well, things aren't as good as they used to be. Well, that's crap. That's always crap, whether you're talking about music or art or ballet or whatever. People are getting better at all these things, if anything. But what is true, obviously, is we all have our sweet spot when things hit us the hardest. And what one of the things that's happened for me is that as I have moved along as a writer, I find more and more need to read nonfiction, to read a lot of science, a lot of history, a lot of stuff like that. So the combination of all those things means I am one of the worst people to ask about who's good. The people that I do read, when I bump across something in an anthology or somebody says, oh, you absolutely have to read this. Hell yeah. Writers today, the young writers of today, are just as good as we were. They're different because they are on the shoulders of yet another generation than my generation was. But that just means, again, that they have more tropes to play with and more ideas to bounce off of. So it has nothing to do with the quality of modern writing. It has more to do with the way that we change as individuals over time. I just don't read that much new fiction. And I particularly don't read much fantasy because it's a busman's holiday for me. I mean, I spend all day, almost every day I work, and I spend hours and hours every day thinking about plot lines and character arcs and all this stuff. And to be honest, now that I've been doing it for 40 years, it's not what I want to do to relax at night. It's not
That's
what I want to do. It doesn't relax me. It keeps me in that mode. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to probably wait until I quit writing entirely, which may never happen, to be able to sit down and go, now what have I missed? And I'm
team
sure,
hope it doesn't happen, for the record.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure that I'm missing a lot of really wonderful stuff. But as I said to my wife and mentioned earlier, I am already kind of formed as a writer. So anything that influenced me from something new would be almost like I was just swiping, I mean, I would be just taking something from somebody else and adding it to what's already my norm. So I don't have that. That doesn't appeal to me. Do I like being delighted and pleased by something I hadn't expected? Yes. But because I'm cutting down on the amount of stuff in my turf, in my area that I'm reading, it's not going to happen very often. So it's unfair for me to go, oh, I heard about this guy, or, I mean, I don't have much to see that. I can name a lot of nonfiction writers who I'm working with that I love, but that's not the same thing. So, but again, I want to make it very clear. There's a lot of really good writers coming up. And there's a lot that are younger than me, but are already established, who are brilliant also. So it has nothing to do with the quality. It's not one of those boomer things of like, oh, everything was better when I was young. No, it wasn't. You were just more receptive because that was your sweet spot when everything was important. So anyway, end of answer.
I'm bad about, like, if you ask me to recommend you a book, the chances of it coming out in the last 20 years are not likely, because I do read modern fantasy, but so many of my favorites are series that are a little bit older. So my niche is the 90s, 100%. Most of my favorites around that, and it's just, so like I'm often reading older stuff or discovering older stuff that I hadn't seen, and talking about that. But also it's, there's plenty of people who are always excited, like, oh my gosh, nobody ever talks about this series, and so I like having that and mixing that with newer stuff for sure as well.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's the generational sine wave, I've seen it like on YouTube all the time, where it passes backwards. And like a few years ago, not a few years ago, but, back when I first started, being online all the time and stuff like that, everybody was very nostalgic about the 70s, because we were all like, by then we were in our 30s and whatnot. And then, it's gradually moving forward as the wave continues to ripple. And, people are very excited about the 90s now in a nostalgia sense. And but I'm also seeing the first grumblings of the early 2000s nostalgia, which is because then you've got all the people who are like 15 in 2003 who are now out in the workforce and wanting something to escape to. And they're going, oh, my favorite cartoon from 2002, So once you get old, you begin to see that these things, everybody's got their sweet spot, and the amount of attention depends on what the demographic of the conversations are. So if your conversations are mostly by 30-year-olds, then the demographic of 30-year-olds is going to be mostly interested in the nostalgia of their childhood and teenage years. So, and I may benefit from that for some people because that was when, they knew my books. So I'm willing to ride that wave until we finally get to the point where nobody remembers me at all. That's okay too.
Hopefully we won't get there for a really long time. So.
Yeah, I'm kidding, but I'm a realist. I'm a realist. I'm a history buff. I know that there are many, many factors on why people get attention or why they become culturally significant in some way. And those things very seldom last. You just hope you do something that has enough impact that some people will continue to come back to it. Just like some of the books that, I've been reading T.H. White's The Once and Future King on the air on my weekend readings. And that was a book that was important to me in a number of ways, both as a kid and then later on as a wannabe writer. And so I'm sharing it, not necessarily thinking that people are going to have the same reaction I did, but just to kind of keep that generational door open so that people will go, oh, maybe I could read something that was written before I was born and actually get something out of it. Because unfortunately, that's where the problem comes, is that oftentimes once that window of the wave passes, then it just kind of fades from sight, But the classics remain. People still read The Great Gatsby. People still read The Sun Also Rises. People still read Jane Austen, for God's sake. Wonderful. I still read Jane Austen. And she's 200 years in the past. So that's another reason to just try and write the best thing you can write, because, you won't be around. So that's the only thing that's going to speak for you.
Yeah, that's a good thought too. And hopefully it'll last, which, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn was published in full before I was born, just barely. But it was
there you go.
I was born, so I was still really happy to discover it. And I even came a little late to it because it was only like 4 years ago, I think, that I read it and fell in love with it. And it did remind me of stuff that I loved when I was younger too, in a lot of ways. But yeah, it definitely hits there for me. And then, yes, I was getting regular updates as he read the series, and also just ended up binging and loving it as well, too. So that's where, whenever people are like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this and so excited, I love hearing that, too.
Well, one of the other nice things, and by the way, Rogue, thank you. One of the other things that's nice is that we have a constant sort of in the news cycle and everything, there's a kind of an undercurrent always of people today have a 16-second attention span. And while there may be truth to that, I haven't gone into the science enough to know if there's any validity to it or not, that people's attention span is shortening. What I do know is that obviously it's not completely so. If I'm managing to make a living off of books that are or stories that are thousands of pages and a million words or more in total, that's a lot of attention that people are paying to those things. So clearly it's not universal. It's not like, okay, it's no longer possible to read long books. In fact, it's the audience and the reader's desire for those books that keeps me writing long books, when in fact, for many reasons, it would probably be better for me to write shorter books. Not that there are artistic reasons why I continue to write long books, and that's a whole other subject. But so it's all 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But I don't think the attention spans are quite as bad as Again, it's the reductionism of the news cycle and what people talk about, and I don't think people have changed really that much. I think the way we communicate has changed, but I don't think yet that it's changed people, and that's both good and bad.
Yeah. So, Andrew said he's starting Tailchaser today, which good. And I do want to talk about Tailchaser very specifically, but something you said there, it brought me to something else I was curious to ask you about, because several years ago, you did in an interview with Flames Rising, you made a comment that you thought the future with how people consume books and everything it sounded like going to be becoming a little bit more serialized, where like they're going to get it like a TV episode and keep coming back. So that I feel like a pretty accurate prediction, because there are a lot of really, really popular series right now that are serialized or started as like web serials. So I was just curious, what do you think the next like shift is going to be?
The next shift
in how people are reading. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that probably caused that comment, which I don't specifically remember, but probably caused that comment, and would also feed into anything that I would foresee, is that we are becoming a society that actually people are more like me, is what's happening. And I have always taken in information in many little bits and pieces from many, many different sources. And I have always wanted to be able to do it at my own pace, when I want, where I want. And in that sense, I kind of, not just me, lots of people probably like me, but in that sense, I kind of foretold some of these things in that people will want to be able to build their own kind of ongoing feed of stuff that interests them. And that is more and more becoming the case, where whatever you're on, they now have algorithms, tracking algorithms, and the increasing use of AI, where they're going to be more and more people are going to be aiming things at you because of what you've indicated you want, and you will take them in those bits and pieces. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that it's like eating ice cream, that you love. And if you had like a big pipe that brought, whatever your favorite is, caramel ripple, right? And if you had a big pipe that came directly into your house and just fixed itself to your mouth and shot caramel ripple into your mouth whenever you wanted ice cream, it would take a while before you began to go, are there any other flavors? I mean, yeah, this is a pipe full of wonderful ice cream that I can have whenever I want, but are there other flavors? Could I get a different one? Could I try something completely different, like tapioca, or would that break the machine? So the main issue for the next 50 years of social media, I think, is curation. It's how do you decide and find what you want and set it up in such a way that you have access to it. Because obviously there's one way you can do that, and that is to tirelessly search the internet. And even there, you will miss stuff. But more and more, with the failure of these vertical systems like newspapers and print magazines and things that tell you what you like, we will be curating for ourselves from a number of curators that will tell us, oh, here's the latest, this kind of stuff. You might like one of these. And we're already doing that in many ways. So I think that's the main thing, is we will continue to get things in small bites because we're fitting things in between other things in a way we didn't used to. But in the same sense, also, we will be getting a variety of things that we are predisposed to like, which is good, but is also potentially problematic. Because then we don't, and it's even more problematic for creators. If you're only reading the stuff that you personally like, and then you're trying to create it as well, you have a very incestuous, narrow field that you're getting your input from, and you're going to only probably make small changes in your own creativity to those formula. Whereas if you're casting your curation net more broadly, you will write a more heterogeneous and interesting, or create a more heterogeneous and interesting kind of art, if that's what you do.
Yeah. Well, and I think that does, you can definitely see that's sort of where we're going now, and that makes a lot of sense. And for me, it's almost made word of mouth even more important, because if I'm getting some of the advertisers like, you might like this, I'm like, yeah, probably not. And I'm a lot less likely in some ways to pick those things up unless somebody specifically is like, no, hey, you will like this.
Ignore the stupid ad campaign. It's actually a good whatever it is. Yeah.
Oh, and sometimes ads can be good and be like, oh, I actually did, I really like this thing that some algorithm thought I would, but
Yeah.
it's not always going to be true.
No,
By
exactly.
any
And
means
that's,
either.
yeah. And that's curation. You're saying this offends me, but it might actually be useful for me. So I won't just throw it out. I'll give it a little bit of a try first, and vice versa. Oh, this looks like something I'd love, but before I throw myself into it, because I do that now all the time. I cannot tell you how often I will watch somebody else discussing a movie that I know I probably won't ever sit down and watch all the way through, but I'm interested in it, or I'm interested in the commentator and how they are going to approach it and what they're going to say about it, if they're funny or something. But a lot of times it's just because that will allow me to be conversant with a movie that I would probably never otherwise watch. And being conversant, being literally able to make conversation, is what the internet is about. And that is what it does best, is just make a faster system of passing ideas around, rejecting ideas in many cases, humiliating ideas in others, but also lionizing things and bringing them to a lot of people's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have a class here who is saying here's gateway drug to a life of fantasy, and thinks Otherland was visionary.
Thank
We have
you.
Andrew very confused about banana slugs too.
Let me see let me have a look here. No, I don't have one I can show you offhand. I could bring one in. Andrew, I will just explain very quickly. We live on the coast side of the San Francisco Bay Area. The banana slug is a slug that runs about yay long, so 6 to 8 inches generally as an adult. They are bright, screaming emergency yellow. You can go look one up online if you don't believe me. They are, you cannot miss them. They are literally the color of emergency barriers and the stripes on wasps and stuff. But anyway, they are perfectly lovely, harmless creatures who clean up the detritus on the ground and stuff like that. But they're so popular around here that the University of California at Santa Cruz, UCSC, their actual mascot is the banana slug. And in fact, you can get T-shirts with the UCSC fighting banana slugs or whatever on them. So they are very common in the redwood country, and we were right at the lower edge of the redwoods area, and we've got redwoods around our properties, and that for some reason is a kind of area they like. So, but we had them in our last house too, and our kids fell in love with them. So that's what they are. They're just this local slug, but they're gorgeous and they're harmless, and they will, you'll come down some mornings and find 2 of them climbing up your windows. They're quite daunting if you've never seen them before. I've had friends from out of town get up and see a banana slug on the porch, and they think they're in an episode of The Outer Limits or something. Oh my God, what is that? It's just a banana slug. They travel about a yard every hour. They're not a threat in any way. But so that's
from perusing several interviews, and even I was just watching the one you did with Matt recently too. I'm just I love how often the banana slugs come up in the interviews. It's just like a fun little Easter egg of your interview.
Well, when we first moved into our previous house, which was also just on the edge of the redwood zone, our son came home and one day and gave every banana slug, and because we had a stone wall, a mossy stone wall in the backyard, which really attracted them for some reason. And it's a family memory that we will never lose. He walked around and he named every single banana slug he saw. There were like 12 or 13 of them, and every single one of them was a 2-syllable name. He was really little at the time. There were 2-syllable names that ended in ER. So they were all named like Durger, Darder, Wurwer, Marmer, these like this. But he named them so confidently. He goes, and that's Blurmer, and that's Darder. And just walking along. So we've ever since then, whenever he happens to be around and we see a banana slug, we're always, is that Durger again? It's been 20 years. I don't think they live that long. And he's like, leave me alone.
Oh, I love that. We have Michael, who is really looking forward to this. Heidi saying Brian Lee Durfee convinced to read Williams. Yeah, I know that's another author that's a big fan of yours.
Oh, and Brian is a wonderful human being. There was he just recently put up a review of The Navigator's Children, and the first comment that I saw was we all need somebody to love us as much as Brian loved Tad Williams's work. And I was like, oh,
It's so
Oh,
fair.
how sweet.
Yeah.
Well, because he's a smart guy. He's a good writer himself. He's very good. And it's always a pleasure when a smart reviewer gets what you're doing. That's just, I mean, because as I said, I'm not writing just for myself. I'm writing to share
Yeah.
these things. And the difference between a reviewer and a reader is usually only just that the reviewer is trying to put their reaction into words so that other people can understand them in a way other than just, I loved it. The I loved it reviews from non-reviewer readers are just as wonderful. Don't get me wrong. But the value of the reviewer is to say, here's why I love this, and here's why you might, or vice versa, obviously, if you didn't like it. But that's what a reviewer does. Again, that's curation. And that's why we establish trust with our curators in our artistic lives, with the people who we trust to at least have an understanding of the same things that we do. So whether it's Brian or you, Nico, or anybody, you are doing an important service in that you are spreading this stuff out to other people who might also like it. And presumably by establishing trust with them with the way you've talked about other things, and that they've actually picked them up and gone, oh yeah, this is really good. Nico was right, And again, like we said earlier, word of mouth, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then your word of mouth, kind of. So Penrita Singh picked up The Failures by Benjamin Lyer from your blurb, which I still feel bad about this one. I've not read this because Daw reached out to me, and it was during a period where I didn't check my email for like 2 months because I had a newborn. And
Congratulations, by the way.
Well, thank you. We got she's just about 6 months now. So
Killer.
it's still young, but yeah, I just kind of stopped checking my my booktube.
Believe me, I understand. As I said, that's kind of why we stopped going to conventions. It's like it started out as being just something for about a year, and then like 20 years later, we went, oh yeah, we kind of never went back to being social animals after we had kids.
Yeah, I can see it. Class pointing out that people who like you tend to like Hanuvar, which is pretty true. I don't know if you know that one. It's a
I
newer
don't
series by
actually.
Howard
I'm
Andrew
intrigued.
Jones.
I'm
It's
intrigued.
modern sword and sorcery. Excellent. The Lord of Shattered Land's the first book here.
Excellent. Okay, good.
Excellent series.
So Hanuvar, is that the world or the character, or
that's the character. He's kind of like sword and sorcery Hannibal. Sorry, I was drawing a blank for a minute. So it's kind of like takes place like after the fall of Carthage, except it's everything's different here. But it's very, very sword and sorcery, but in a modern way. And really good series. It's been a recent favorite for me.
Excellent. Well, I will take that as a recommendation. I started out actually from fantasy point of view, I started out even younger, and then was doing Lord of the Rings when I was like 11. But I was also really big on the sword and sorcery too. Because when I was like 12, I was reading Conan, and then I discovered Michael Moorcock and Fritz Leiber and a lot of the other people who were not just huge to me as a reader, but also were very influential on me as a writer as well. So and still are. As I said, I basically most of my influences kind of stopped by the time I got to be an adult, and so these people are just as important.
I think that happens naturally.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why I'm still a big Beatles fan, and that was my part of the sine wave. But no, absolutely, and there's a reason that I still love this stuff. But oftentimes, as we were talking about, there's actually value to be had, even if it's not part of your age demographic, in Moorcock or Leiber or, any of these really excellent writers from the 60s and 70s that somehow just aren't as known. Not somehow, they obviously aren't as well known as more contemporary writers, but they deserve to be because they were good then and they're still good now. So.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so Hanuvar is the character.
Hanuvar.
Yes. Check that out.
Definitely do recommend. Excellent stuff. And then Chadi saying just started, still for a while, a bit behind, but hey, it's never too late at all.
Exactly. Never apologize. Many people have said that they found that to be the most satisfying book of the trilogy tetralogy. It was certainly one in which I felt I felt I was still on a learning curve with the Dragonbone Chair because that was only my second novel, and it was the first one I'd ever written knowing it was going to be published. Because Tailchaser Song I was writing, on my kitchen table at night with no idea that it would ever turn into anything. But I felt like there were still some parts of the Dragonbone Chair where I was learning and guessing at what might work and what might not. And I felt like Stone of Farewell, in a way, this is not to say I'm in any way ashamed or embarrassed of the Dragonbone Chair. No, not at all. I think it turned out really well. But Stone of Farewell, I think, was the first book where I felt like, okay, I understand now what I'm doing and how I want to do it. And so the entire book started out that way and finished up that way. And I don't think I've changed very much since then. So in a sense, that was kind of the first time I already knew how I was going to write when I started something. And so therefore it has a feeling.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it has a feeling of, what's the word I'm looking for? Of purity sounds wrong. Sounds like I'm kind of weird, freaking racist thing. But it has a congruity that doesn't change much from one end to the other in terms of the style and the approach of the writing. Not that anybody cares about that, but that's what popped off in my brain seeing Stone of Farewell.
No. Hey, I mean, we're all here because we do very much want to hear what you have to say, so no worries at all.
It can be frightening. It can be frightening and sudden. I'll just warn you.
Yeah, I think that was in response to the slugs saying they taste terrible. And
yeah, no, do not eat banana slugs. No, nobody. Not only do they not deserve it, but yes, as I believe it was Lucas, as Lucas said, no, they do not taste. And I hope, Lucas, that was not your personal discovery. I hope it was one of your pets or one of your less pleasant neighbors that made that discovery about you. But I can't imagine anybody putting a banana slug in their mouth voluntarily. They don't look like something good to eat.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't sound like a great idea from the start. Kind of a non-starter. No. But so I do want to wrap back to Tailchaser Song because that was such a surprising and I feel like kind of unique experience. Because I went back and read that after I'd read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And I was more familiar kind of with your style and some of your other stuff. And I went back and read that. And it was like, it was good, but it was just so different. And so I'm wondering with just, how what was that like? Like, was there, because I know you said that your publisher's like, hey, do you have any other stuff you want to publish? And that's how you did Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. But was there ever a weird pitch meeting where you're explaining like, okay, so this one's cats. This one is a giant epic fantasy.
Okay.
About this.
Yeah, no, the world was so different then, at least for me. I started writing Tailchaser Song, and this is a story I've told a zillion times, so I won't go into it in detail. But my my ex had cats. I had never lived with cats. I had only lived with dogs. So it was an entirely new experience, including the absolute self-satisfaction of cats. It was something, it's like, the joke I always make is the different ways that dogs and cats treat their quote unquote owners. But anyway, without going into that whole story, but I was living in a fourplex apartment with 3 other families or people, renters. And one of them was a guy who was teaching at Stanford. He had the Wallace Stegner literature chair at Stanford.
Okay.
His name was Ron Hansen. Very good writer. Ron is very nice guy. And as I got to know him over the course of my, first year living there, I began to have these weird things of like, here's this guy, he's written a couple of really well-respected, very good novels about the Old West, actually. One of his novels was made into a Brad Pitt movie called The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Oh, okay.
And Ron wrote a lot of stuff based in the West. It was something, he was from Nebraska. I think it was something he felt a kinship with. But anyway, so hanging out with Ron occasionally, I would go, Ron's a smart guy and he's a good writer, but I don't think he's that different from me. And I was already doing a lot of creative stuff and I'd done some writing, over the years for various projects. So I said, I could write a book and it's something I could do in my own time because I was facing those time constraint things that we were talking about earlier with all my other projects, my theater, my music, blah, blah, blah. So I was kind of casting around, and I had already been thinking for like months about like how weird cats were and how what a weird view of the universe they must have, because it must have to do with the way that humans once were, where every other creature on earth is there to serve, you know? So what I was just playing around with this in my mind in the way that I often did, never knowing that that was somehow I was going to completely make my living, but hoping I would. And I began to kind of play games with cat mythology and cat folklore and how they would see the universe and things like that. And then somewhere along the line, the two ideas ran together. And I said, I could write a novel, and the protagonist would be a cat. They'd all be cats. And we'd use some of these ideas and blah, blah, blah. So then I set out to write a fantasy novel. And reason I chose fantasy was because it was something that had been so formative for me. I felt like I'll have a better chance of knowing if what I'm doing is utter crap or if it's any good, you know, if it has any chance for making, you know, a dent anywhere. So that's what happened. I wrote Tailchaser Song. Now, the whole thing, and again, wrote it on electric typewriter, weirdest typewriter you've ever seen. It was literally a cursive typewriter. You just don't see them anymore, but I had inherited that from my ex-father-in-law. So I wrote the book. I sent it off to Judy Lynn Del Rey at Del Rey, because at the time they were the fantasy publisher I knew best, and got it back immediately. And that's a whole other story, which I won't tell now, but it was kind of funny actually. But anyway, I got it back immediately. Basically, they weren't interested. And then I sent it to Daw. But this is in the days of the over the transom unsolicited manuscript thing. We say over the transom in the business. I don't know if people still say it, because the transom is the little window over the door, like in an office, that can be opened or closed. And at night, people used to throw submissions in over the transom into the publishing office, you know, so that the next day the people would come in and find a box with a manuscript in it on the floor. It literally meant an unagented manuscript. And at the time, I didn't want an agent because I couldn't get an agent without a huge search. I said, well, I might as well just go to publishers instead, and do my huge search there. So Daw was the ones who bought it, and I was very fortunate, but I didn't know anything about the process. I had just made a list of who were the publishers of the books that I saw in the fantasy section who seemed to grasp what their remit was in the publishing world. So Daw was the second one, and we hit it off. They loved the book. 40 years later, I'm still publishing with Betsy, who is Donald Walheim's daughter. Don was still there when I sold Tailchaser. And in fact, he was a big proponent of the book. But yeah, it was funny too, because for the first several years in the industry, I was the cat book guy. And in fact, Harlan Ellison, who is talking of influential authors, Harlan was very big for me. And when he came out with his Harlan Ellison, I don't know, there was like a compendium book, a really nice one.
Yeah.
The Ellison Companion or something. And one of the people in the bookstore in LA where he was signing books, I told him, please save me one. And Harlan actually stopped when he got to the one that said it was for me. He goes, look, see, even the cat book guy reads me. And so that was my burden that I had to carry. That was my cross to bear for several years. It was a cat-shaped cross. Until, other things started to happen. And I was literally a little nervous, I wrote the cat book kind of as a one-off. I didn't intend to become the author of a series of them. So the idea that I was going to spend the rest of my life as the cat book author was a bit daunting. But fortunately, that particular conversation changed. So, but yeah, it was a very different world where there was no internet. I had to kind of go to Writers Marketplace and specialty magazines and look in the back of Locus and try and figure, because I wasn't somebody who went to cons. I wasn't a fan with a capital F. I was just a reader. Yeah, they were different times.
Yeah.
Says old guy.
So, I have still not actually gotten to. I had a few people who sent me questions ahead of time, and then we have one in the chat. So we'll do some like rapid fire questions.
Sure.
With it, because I keep thinking of other things I want to talk about as we go. Okay. So I'm trying to make sure I don't take all your time here. But Monty Adkins asked if you've played the Otherland MMO.
Oh my God. Okay, there's a huge long story there. I'll try to make this as short as possible. I was very involved in the early stages of the Otherland MMO. what happened was we had, and I'm going to try and make this as brief as I can, one of the main sources of funding. That thing was going along. It was going gangbusters. It was going really good. We were in beta phase. And then one of the guys who was one of the main sources of funding, his business partner, not the guy himself, not the guy who was funding Otherland or helping to fund and organize the funding for Otherland. His business partner was arrested for like some kind of fraud or embezzlement.
Oh.
But because it was his business partner, that guy's assets were also frozen. So basically it was just as we were coming up to the point where it was about to be released, the bottom dropped out of it. And all of a sudden we had this, there was like a 75 to 100 people working in Singapore full-time on this thing, and all this stuff happened. And then boom, within a matter of weeks, the whole operation closed down because they couldn't pay them. And then the company who had the rights resold them to a Polish company, which basically stepped in and took what was there and made a few last minute changes to make it available, because I think at that point the people mostly just wanted to earn some money back on it, because it had been a big ticket project until this funding thing happened. So they put out their version of it. So first off, I'm not a big gamer anyway. And second of all, for me, it was such a painful thing. So yes, it still exists out there, but we're working on other possibilities for Otherland. I hope they come to pass. But that itself was something that was so close to being something really great, and then just bad luck, whatever, just chop the legs out from under it. So I have a lot of pain in me about that process. I mean, I was going to Singapore several times a year, was very involved in the whole thing, and then it just kind of collapsed. That's which is how these things are, which is one of the things about film, television, gaming adaptations, is if you consider that because something has started, that it's going to happen, you are doomed to disappointment most of the time, my good friend. It just ain't going to happen that way. So, there's still a lot of good stuff to be seen in that MMO, but it was a catastrophe for me personally in terms of, just broke my heart that happened when we were so close.
Well, and I said I was going to do some rapid fire, but I've changed my mind now, because that brings up something I was going to say. Because you have, I know Otherland, there's talks of an adaptation for that, and I know for Memory of Star and Thorn, I think as well, and I think Tailchaser at some point was option too, if I recall. But like, do you know, are any of those at a point where like, hey, something's really happening, or how do you feel about any of those?
The closest to anything happening at the moment is Otherland, which is currently under the control of somebody who wants to do something, not control, but they have the rights to do something with it, which I don't want to talk about because I don't want to mess anything up for them. Yeah, but it's totally been going on for a while. The pandemic happened right in the middle of it, so it scrambled the whole thing. I hope it still works out. I think they're good people. We will see on that. The Tailchaser thing, as I said, these are like stories of horror and despair mostly. The Tailchaser thing, we literally were at the point we're about to sign the contracts with a group who'd had the rights for a while, and they had found a new source of funding, and so we went, oh great, okay, finally. Turned out that funding was from the Saudi Crown Prince's fund for the arts, where they were making a big push into America, trying to get creative partners. And literally, like the week we were going to sign the whole thing, Khashoggi, I've just gone blank on Khashoggi's first name. Adnan? No, that's another Khashoggi. Anyway.
The journalist, yeah.
Yeah, the journalist was murdered in cold blood by a Saudi security group, apparently under the direction of the Crown Prince. That's what everybody is. But anyway, the moment that happened, of course, we were all on the phone together, our agents and Deb and I and whoever else was involved at the time, and just said, there's no way we can go forward with this under these circumstances. We can't take money from somebody after that, something like that has happened. It's just impossible. And to the credit of
crazy stuff,
to the credit of everybody involved, including the people who were going to try to adapt it, even they, that was basically their last chance to make it work, because they'd been struggling to get funding for a long time. And even they didn't ever say, well, maybe. They just said, yeah, you're right. That's, and that was it for that project. And so you can see why I'm not laissez-faire about it, but I'm kind of arm's length on, if any of these things happen, they'll happen.
I can see that.
But I have learned in my many years in the business that if you get all excited and go, hooray, you shouldn't do that. You should wait, because these are, even if something works out, they're long-term processes, and you cannot afford to get too excited too early on, or you will burn right out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then,
but most of my properties are available. If there's somebody out there with like $25 million burning a hole in their pocket, just happens
hear that
to be
people
listening.
In the chat. Get on it.
There you go.
So, are you aware that there are at least 2 metal bands that are named after Memory Sorenthorn? We have Svardenveerd, which is folk metal, and Rimmersgard, which is I'm sorry, I said Svardenveerd is black metal, Rimmersgard is folk metal.
That would make more sense. No, actually, I didn't know about either of those. I periodically over the years, I know Blind Guardian did an Otherland song, and various other people are. And there's a lovely guy in Germany, Sebastian Barwinek, who has literally taken a lot of the songs from the books and put them to music. And he's a really fine musician and singer. But no, those 2 were new to me. So Rimmersgard and Svardenveerd.
I knew I was going to say that wrong.
Swords. Yeah. No. You said it right. I'm just making sure I hear I can look them up later. Yes, Svardenveerd is the Weird of the Swords, obviously, in Rimmersgard. So they're both kind of Rimmersgard-ish.
I don't recommend trying to look that one up because if you don't know what black metal is, you won't.
No, I know what black metal is. I'm just old. I'm not naive. That's
like the nichest of the niche with metal. I feel like I'm not a fan myself, even though I'm a big metal guy. But
yeah. No, I know. There are certainly scary aspects, but I have one of my best friends is basically a speed metal bass player and stuff like that. So
I heard you say that
the ugly side of black metal, no, I'm not comfortable with that. Which fortunately is only some of them. I mean, it's like any group, they're not all responsible for the actions of the crazy ones.
Very true. But yeah, Rimmersgard apparently, and they're from Germany. And I actually, when I was just looking up something about them for this, because I had them on a list, I did a series of videos about metal songs that are about fantasy. But they apparently had a new album come out this year, but they've been around since '95.
I am ashamed that I didn't know about either of these, and I will certainly look them up. I will certainly look up Rimmersgard.
Well, I mean, no shame at all there. Like you said with the books, with it, finding niche metal bands about books is kind of a thing.
Yeah, but
that's passion of mine. So
that's one of the cool things about doing this, though, is these interesting little tributes. I mean, there was somebody who was making there was some kind of I believe it was a big high-speed processor of some kind that they named Inaluki. So
that's great.
So I mean, yeah, that kind of stuff is excellent. I love that. I'm always thrilled to hear something like that. I several times I've gone, on the web, on the net, and said, I wonder if anybody has used this character name as their online nick, and you turn up and there's like dozens and hundreds of them. You're going, yeah, so okay. I'm not completely shouting into a bucket. There are people out there listening. That's cool.
I like searching for those kinds of things about books. I like too, but I actually did write a song called Storm King, which I don't know if you remember. You retweeted it when I posted about it a while back, but it was it's very much based on Inaluki and Memory Sorenthorn and everything too.
Excellent. I suspect if it was, when you say reposted, that may mean that only Deb saw it and she tried to tell me and I didn't see it or something like that, because Deb was the one who was very active on that, the artist, no longer known as Twitter. And so, yeah, the very term repost means it was probably Deb. She probably tried to tell me about it at the time and I missed it. So if at some point you want to send me a link to something or whatever, I would love to.
Sure.
So
Yeah, I'll send you a link to that, and then I can send you. I'll pull some links for those other bands for you,
Oh, that
just
would
so
be
you
great.
have them, and send. But yeah, I don't use a lot of social media, but I have that one just for book stuff. But
Yeah.
I actually have never updated the app, so I still have Twitter. It tries to make me update, and I just don't. So
Well,
I still have the old one.
long time ago, it became clear to me that Deb was going to be the Twitter maven in our family because for whatever reasons, it worked really well for her. And whereas I'm like, for one thing, I feel like to truly appreciate that kind of thing, you probably need to be on it fairly frequently. And Deb was much more able to do that along with all of her other work. Whereas for me, I kind of have to go down in a deep hole for several hours. But I did recently, and we both kind of moved over to Blue Sky recently. So I'm going to try and be better about staying in touch with that kind of a readership, as opposed to, where Facebook, which is a different thing. And I haven't yet managed there's almost no way to join into some of the other operations, especially when you have something to sell. I'm talking about like TikTok or Instagram or whatever the kids like now, because first of all, you do have the reason you're doing it is in part because you are essentially selling something, which is always suspect anyway. And second of all, there's always that famous Steve Buscemi meme, of like, hi there,
How do you do, fellow kids?
fellow kids. Yeah. And the one thing is that I would never try to be that person because I am too much of a student of life and history and all that. I understand how those things work, and I don't want to try and make a fool of myself by trying to. So it's always a weird thing with me. But Blue Sky is kind of like where all the Twitter people who were not real thrilled with Elon Musk have gone. And I, needless to say, fit into that category. Or maybe it's not needless to say, but I fit into that category. And Deb, who loved Twitter in its heyday, is even more like, please, God, let me find some alternative. So that's where
I need to check that out.
Yeah, that's where we're, and it apparently, I mean, they picked up like millions just since the election. So, and that's not a comment on anybody's politics. That's just a lot of people don't like the rules that have been put into place. Whether you like Musk's politics or not, there's a lot of people who just are upset with the fact that there's no, speaking of curation, there's no moderation or much moderation anymore, except for what some people see as a pretty negative kind of moderation. So anyway, so Blue Sky, we'll see.
And then Monty just saying that Happy Hour in Hell was one of the most compelling things he's ever read.
That is very, very reassuring. Thank you, Monty. I appreciate it. No, seriously, because that was the book that I thought that in many ways I was extremely proud of, but a lot of people found it really depressing and a bummer because most of it takes place in hell. And me being a world builder, I was like, hooray, hooray. I could sit down and try to invent a working version of hell, that fits in with,
I mean, interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating, trying to think about how do I encapsulate both the stuff, the classical stuff about hell and punishment and blah, blah, blah. For somebody like me, I don't personally believe that there is such a thing as hell, but how can I make it genuine feeling? And of course, in that book, the main character spends a lot of time there, and it is bleak and horrid. I hope interesting also, and I hope the aspects of this character essentially constantly on the run for his life and soul. But it is, a lot of people found it like kind of hard going because it is pretty grim in places. My metalhead friends should love it. If you're a metalhead out there and you haven't read anything of mine, read the Bobby Dollar books, because by the second one, you're going to actually go to hell and spend the whole book there. So, I mean, that's
I am so much more curious about that series, which I was aware of, but was not like high on my list of ones to get to, just because I have a lot of other stuff to get to. But I am very curious now. So speaking of the metal and the,
it was hugely fun to write because, for one thing, it was the first time I could use my modern natural writer's voice without having to filter it through an imaginary, I mean, it's an imaginary environment, obviously, because it's about angels and the battle, the Cold War between heaven and hell and all these kinds of things. And there are monsters and all kinds of things in it, demons, tons of demons. But the main thing is the main character narrates it because it's kind of a noir. And the main character, Bobby Dollar, who is actually the angel Deloriel, narrates the thing in his own first person, slightly noir kind of way. But it's me. It's really my voice in a way that I've never gotten to write in a book before because it's first person. So, you know, it's my sense of humor. It's my sense of the absurd. And it was really fun to write without having to constantly say, you know, oh, I don't think that anybody in a pre-industrial society would use this kind of structure in their sentences or something. I didn't have to worry about that. I'm like, no, he's a modern day character. He talks the way I talk, roughly.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So we'll do the sort of the lightning round here of other stuff. We talked a little bit like music, but going for like music, movies, TV, and partially the metal part just makes me happy inside. But also, I saw that you did a Hugo speech like 20 plus years ago, but the title of it was a play on Dr. Strangelove, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. So I just wanted to, like, if you're a fan of that movie.
I'm a Dr. Strangelove fan. I am a Kubrick fan. All of the above. I am a George C. Scott fan. You know, I mean, all of the actors in it, Slim Pickens. You know, I mean, everybody in it was great. It's amazing to me in a sense that it ever got made. And I think if it had been 5 years earlier, it wouldn't have. But it was in that weird bubble. And this is why age and perspective is interesting. There was that bubble from the late 60s into the early, well, really until Jaws came out. That bubble of time in which, and the same thing happened in music, but that's another story, where the people who had the money, the executives and stuff, had realized that they were out of touch with what the younger audience, which was a growing demographic, wanted. So they were still cranking out, you know, Song of Norway and movies like that, and Cleopatra and stuff. Whereas the audience was going like, oh, Easy Rider, that speaks to us. So they suddenly went, we have no idea. And they started handing money out to people that they literally didn't know much about, whose background was more like, yeah, I'm hip and I'm young, than anything like, oh, here are the films I've made you can look at. So they were giving money to you know, all these new directors, in particular, writers and directors, but many of whom were brilliant, you know, Scorsese and Coppola and Bob Rafelson and all these people, and Kubrick, obviously. And as a result, there was this huge freedom in the late 60s and early 70s that only lasted really a few years. And then the box office monstrosities of Jaws and Star Wars and all this stuff came along, and the executives went, oh, okay, well, we don't know what the small movies are that people will like, but clearly they like these big box office, you know, grandiose things. And that period kind of came to an end. And only a few of those directors, and with some of that willingness to experiment, survived. And fortunately they did. So we did get Coppola, and we did get Kubrick, and we did get Scorsese's other movies, but a lot of other people kind of vanished. So that's a hugely important area. And most of my favorite movies of all time, and again, it coincided with my sweet spot, but it was a lot of people's sweet spot, and not just because of age. It was because it was a imbalance in the market, where people with the money didn't understand what was good and what was bad. So they just handed out money to people who seemed like they might know what the youth wanted.
Yeah, very fair. It is. I mean, it's such a unique movie, but yeah, I love it. I could quote that movie all day. So that was something when I saw that, I'm like, what are the odds? So like I identify so much with the way you write too, but even like you love one of my favorite movies, just makes it even better.
You definitely need to read the Bobby Dollar book someday, because that's very much that's like that's me having a dialogue about things that I like and dislike in a lot of ways, because the character's just, you know, the narrator, he's just talking about, you know, like the kind of people that drive him crazy, and you know, how all modern cars look like running shoes, and, you know, just weird stuff like that. So it's just the flakes of mental dandruff that drift off of my brain. So, but there's also, I mean, obviously there's a big story thing too, because that's what I'm about.
I am that's not unexpected. But my big takeaway from this is I need to bump up that series because you have so beyond piqued my interest about it. Which, like I said, I would have gotten to it eventually anyway. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Gonna check that
my
out.
work here is done. My work here is done.
So, but the other art related question, because I wanted to ask because I love so many of your covers, and I love Michael Whelan in general. He's one of my favorite.
Michael Whelan time.
Yes, I told that was one of the first comments on the chat, and it's, finally getting to it, which I feel bad to do it toward the end, but he is one of my favorite authors, big time. And I put specifically Empire of Grass might be one of my favorite covers of all time in general. I absolutely love this. And then out of the original, Stone of Farewell, I think is my favorite from the original trilogy. I also love it. Just amazing cover. So I was going to ask, what is, any comments you have there too, but like what's your favorite cover out of either yours, other stuff, in general? Because I'd be curious.
My favorite cover, first of all, I have a predisposition toward the Otherland books, and that's not because of the books themselves, but because for those books, again, it's the intersection of historical and social stuff at work here. Michael was freed a bit from the remit of having to show characters on the cover. So the only one of the 4 books in the Otherland series where a character is sort of front and center is River of Blue Fire, the second book. And it's a beautiful cover. I mean, it's beautifully constructed, beautifully painted. But that's the only one with a major figure on the cover in central focus. And I love all the covers for those books. And my damn publisher, who I also happen to love, unfortunately for me, because she owns all of them. I would have loved to have bought one of the Otherland covers, but she owns them all, and she gloats to me every time I come to visit. She's like, "Hey, did you see that? See that cover? That's one of the covers off of you." I was stop being mean. But anyway, but of all of those covers, and I loved all 4 of them, I think my favorite was the 3rd one from Mountain of Black Glass. And I don't know why. I think it's something about him playing with symmetry of it and the Egyptian symbology and the colors and all of that stuff. But, we all know that Michael Whelan is a brilliant cover artist, is one of the very finest who's ever lived. And I go far enough back and have studied far enough back. I mean, like, I'm really interested in illustration. That was what I came out of before I became a writer. So, I feel very comfortable saying that, there's no question Michael is, if not the greatest cover artist in fantasy and science fiction, he's up in the top 3, I mean, he's brilliant. And I was lucky enough to have had many covers from him. I love the Stone of Farewell cover. I have to confess, I even like the 2 Green Angel Tower cover better because of the wraparound thing, where you can look at it either way.
It is. I mean, it is. Like, they're all good. I mean,
so
like,
that's one.
There's no bad ones.
That's one picture when you open that cover up. It's one painting, and I think Michael made it available as a poster without the parchment framing device, so you can actually see that one half of the tower is covered in ice and snow. That's the contemporary half, and the other, the side with the Scythia. Anyway, so I love that cover. I love Stone of Farewell too. It's interesting to me that the Simon in the first on Dragonbone Chair looks like one person. Simon in the Stone of Farewell looks a bit like me when I had hair. And Simon in To Green Angel Tower looks a lot like Michael Whelan. So there's I have no idea if any of that is true or that's just my own particular perception. But anyway, but speaking of Michael, then 2 times now, and this is my we all have frustrations with the industries that we work in. And this is my frustration. 2 times now, I've had Michael taken off of the paintings. For one, it happened in Shadow March after the first volume, and it happened in this one after the second volume. In both cases, it had nothing to do with my publishers not wanting to use Michael. It had everything to do with the corporate parent, I guess, for whom my publishers they're no longer connected. That was one of the things that changed during the process of writing this series. The Last King of Ostenard is they actually changed their corporate partner. But that was basically something where the corporate side stepped in and said, we're not paying for Michael Whalen. Michael costs too much. Well, there's a reason he costs a lot. And
there is.
He's brilliant and he sells books. I can't tell you, Nico, how many people over the years have come up to me and say, I'm kind of ashamed to say this, but I only picked up the Dragonbone chair because I thought the cover was so great. And then it turned out I liked the book. And I'm like, that's why they do it.
The number of books that I have picked up over the years because I can at a glance see that it's either Michael Whalen or like Daryl K. Sweet or something. I can pick them. I'm like, oh, what's this? I'm going to check, and just, it's such a big thing for me too. So big time. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm not criticizing that. I mean, in fact, I had some involvement in deciding what the new covers would look like and going for a more symbolic and less naturalistic look. And I figured, like, at this point, well, I don't want to sort of imitate Michael. I'd rather do something quite different. And then maybe later on we'll do, new paper covers to add, that people who like a uniform set can have covers for the first two, and people who want to do, leave the Michael Whalen covers don't have to. They can. They don't have to do anything with them.
Yeah.
But it was immensely frustrating because, if nothing else, I'm a fan. I am a fan of Michael's work. It was always delightful. I would get to look at his sketches and make suggestions and things like that. And then the actual painting would come in, and it was always better than I was hoping for, because he's incredibly talented.
Yep,
so
that's
losing that artistic skill twice is really one of the things you get frustrated in this business.
I just recently talked about that in a video about cover art, because I'm like, not only once but twice, and because I have all the hardcovers, and in the new versions, they're not bad by any means, but they're not Michael Whalen.
Yeah.
I mean, and
no, exactly.
Nothing else is. So
it wasn't that I couldn't ever bear to see anybody else's versions of my book covers, because I've had different versions in lots of places. Some of them have been lovely and brilliant and really good. It's just I wanted to see what Michael was going to do, because he'd done such great stuff on the first two series that he worked on, the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn and Otherland, and I was just dying to see what he was going to do with Shadow March, and same thing with the Witchwood Crown series. So, but
absolutely.
I can't be very bitter about it, because so many really good art writers out there have never had a chance to have a lot of the kind of covers that I've had. So, what am I going to say? Oh, poor me. Just, I had to get somebody else other than Michael Whalen,
That is a positive.
I'd smack me if I heard me say that.
All right, so I'll do one final question, because we've run up to like the max time I even gave you.
God, we have, haven't we?
It's gone by so fast.
It's because I'm so shy. You don't notice the time going by. You're just hoping. God, I hope I can get him to say something. Yeah.
I mean. So I'll wrap it, because I had a couple of other questions relating to Navigator's Children and/or what's next. But one person specifically asked about Turia, because there's kind of a cliffhanger with the way things go for her.
Yes.
And then somebody also asked about what might be like the biggest badass we haven't seen yet in Ostenard. But so I'll wrap that into just the two words: what's next?
Okay, well, what's next in the specific sense is I am actually working on another Ostenard book, which is called The Splintered Sun, and it is set about 200 years earlier in Hernistir in the time of King Tethtain. But it's really about a group called Flan's Crows, who are kind of an outlaw band. But it will intersect in many ways with other work of mine. In some ways, it may be a bit faster moving. I'm hoping that these will be eventually individual novels rather than series books, and maybe slightly shorter. But that's, we'll see what happens with it. But
shorter, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I know. But I'm working on it. I feel like I'm halfway through at this point with the new one. And it feels like that's going to be about, like War of the Flowers length, or a little shorter maybe. Anyway, but the other thing that I was going to mention about this is that those who have noticed the Turia Ingaterus thing, when I did the Dragamon Share books, when I did Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, there was a bit in To Green Angel Tower that people quite reasonably but wrongly assumed was me setting up a sequel, which was the birth of the twins. And this is probably not giving away too much of a spoiler after 30 something years, but Jazua and Vorsheva have kids, and Aditu, the Sitha, makes a prophecy for them. And a lot of readers back then thought, oh, he's setting up the sequel. Well, if that's what I was doing, I was really slow in coming out with the rest of that sequel. So, 30 years is, half my audience probably died during that time. So I hope not, but, it's very possible with that much of a lag. But no, that was not my intention at the time at all. Interestingly enough, I did not even think of that. My thought at the time was, I am going to let the readers know that this is not one of those things where nothing happened for 1,000 years and then there's this tremendous drama and then nothing's going to happen again for another 1,000 years. No, I wanted to make the point that this is a magical land where magical, important things happen. And heroism and kindness and all these things have to struggle with their opposites and blah, blah, blah. So that was not meant to indicate a sequel. The Turia in Gadara's bit, which I won't give away, but at the end she's a character who was very big in the second volume. She does make a reappearance, and there is the suggestion that there might be something that has to be looked at in the future there. That was actually intentional, because not just because I wanted to leave the thing open. Obviously, I'd proved before I didn't have to do that to find a way back in, but more just because I thought, she was really interesting and I'd like to write more about her, but we haven't done anything with her since the second book. And I can't really lever her back into the story in a meaningful way here. It would distract from what's happening in the other storylines. But I do want to get back to her. So maybe if I leave her dangling as a possible subject for a sequel,
okay.
So I'll just leave it at that again, because it's near the end of one of the last things that happens in the new book. And I
was trying to be really vague with that.
No, you did great. You did great. So yes, that, unlike the twins and the prophecy, that was meant to say, this is hanging here, swinging back and forth in case you're interested. And I may get to that someday. And who knows, maybe write a third Ostenard monstrosity. After having said for 30 years that I would never go back to anything, I'm not saying that anymore. It depends on how much strength I have and how long I get to be a writer. So.
Well, I mean, hey, I will be one of the first people reading it if you do.
So
I'm definitely here for it. But in closing, thank you so much. This was just a fantastic conversation. I know we've gone long at this point, because it was so hard to pay attention to the time, to the chat, to anything. It's just I've had a great time talking with you. Thank you so much again for coming on. This has just been phenomenal. You are one of my favorite authors of all time, and living or dead, in that category of all time.
I'm in the living category, right?
You are, yes,
okay,
you are still
good.
in the living at this point.
Because if there was something that I should know, we're almost done.
Oh my gosh. But yes, thank you so much for joining. It just has been an absolute blast. So everybody go check out The Navigator's Children is available now. Last King of Ostenard is a fantastic series. It's never too late to start it, even if you're just starting now, or hey, if you haven't read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, or heck, Bobby Dollar, Shadow March, Tailchaser. We've talked about a lot of them in Otherland too, and not even hit on even close to everything that there is. But
no, it's true.
Go read some Tad Williams books, and I don't think you'll regret it.
Thank you so much, Nico. I appreciate it. Thanks for the good questions. Thanks for the entertaining conversation. And if you ever want to do this again, just let me know. And
absolutely,
I will be there.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay.